I want to keep it brief because I'm so eager to hear from Grace about her travels and what she's found out. But what I wanted to talk about this morning briefly is I was thinking about March this month, the last 2 years, we have been, well, actually more than that, but 2 years been dealing with the pandemic and how it has affected all our lives. And I think particularly about March the 7th, for me, I was attending a memorial service at UCLA. There was one of my colleagues, a woman I worked with, her husband had died suddenly in December, and it was into March when she could set up the memorial service. It was, we had worked at the undergraduate admissions office in Murphy Hall at UCLA. I more years than Anne and a number of other people. If you're familiar with the campus, you know that Murphy Hall sits on Charles Young Road or whatever they call the street. And next to it is this kind of old building, the faculty center for UCLA. So we spent a lot of time going back and forth, business meetings, social meetings and things. So it was really appropriate to have the memorial service there in the faculty center. And what happened was after the service was very nice, very pleasant service, but even better for some of us, it was like a homecoming because there were so many of us who had worked there or someplace, faculty and staff on the campus. And we did, many of us, like I am, retired, but some people are still working and some people had moved on. But it was such a wonderful experience to touch base and to catch up with people and what they were doing in their lives. And I think about that so much because that was the last in-person social event I attended. At the time, even though there was this lovely conversation about homecoming, people were starting to talk about the pandemic. What is this? What is COVID-19? We knew it hadn't really spread here yet, but we were discussing our plans. What should we do? And it happened that some friends and I had booked a Caribbean cruise starting in late March. And so actually I have to tell you, it was a Prairie Home Companion cruise, which we've done before, and we loved them because they, I need to talk louder, Steve?
No, you're fine.
No, I'm applauding the cruise.
Yeah, those cruises were so fun because Garrison Keillor was a great host, and there was music everywhere, you know, on deck, in every nook and cranny of the ship. And one of the ship's crew members said to us, she said, you know, I love these Prairie Home Companion cruises because he said, there's not much going on at the bar, but the library is working alive. It was just such fun. But as we considered it, we realized it didn't seem like a good idea. And so we decided to cancel. And after we made the decision, and the cruise line canceled. And I thank God that I wasn't on a ship when some of those people that suffered. So I was thinking then about how we changed. Remember that first year we were so concerned, and so we didn't know what to do. We were washing our hands, we were disinfecting doorknobs, we were not going out. We were, and that first year, my daughter-in-law's father died of COVID.
Mm.
Then few months later, another friend died. But I have to admit, we were not struck as badly as so many people, but the horror of seeing people lined up waiting to get into the hospitals was just so overwhelming. And to see how it's changed our lives, it's not only changed our lives, but our lives were changing anyway. I'm thinking about Steve is moving, people are changing in, not because of the COVID, but in addition to that. So the other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention was that at the same time I'm thinking about this, I am reading the novel called Years of Wonder by Geraldine Brooks. I don't know if you've read it, but it's a fiction about the Black Plague in England in 1666. She's a great writer. I think she won the Pulitzer Prize for March, and People of the Book was another one of her. But I just want to close with this. One of the things that she says in writing this book, it's a true story about a village in England where they were so badly hurt by the plague, but they took the oath not to leave their village so they wouldn't spread it anyplace else. And she writes in this, and I'll close with this, but she writes in this, God's wrath made manifest, because at that time in 1660, well, I'll read what she said. She said 1660 marked both the dawn of modern medicine and the beginning of the age of enlightenment all over Europe. And so she's talking about the political things that went on with King James, with the Puritans, and it became, or it was at any rate, a religious kind of argument, because some people were saying, this is the wrath of God. We have sinned and we're going to pay for it. Other people said, no, that is not the nature of God. And it's interesting to me that those arguments continue today as we look at this and realize that almost 6 million people worldwide have died in this pandemic. And it leaves us to think about the meaning of it and the meaning of our lives. So I just wanted to share that with you as we think about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Beta. That's a very important issues. But this viruses is nothing new, as you said. This Black Plague in Europe. But anyhow, before I forget, I wanted to say Happy International Women's Day, because we missed it a little bit, but just to say that. And I don't know who's going to introduce our speaker for today. Maybe Steve can introduce her, because she's also the vice chair of this organization, and he knows more about grace. So
I do
Steve,
not need an introduction, Fernando. I don't think
okay.
everybody here.
Okay, because I don't want to.
So we won't waste a lot of time on anything that Steve might say that was just not true anyway. So Vita, thank you so much for that reflection. I just realize, too, that it is really the pandemic, these 2 years have given us an opportunity to reflect on our lives, on the meaning of life, and on the meaning of our relationships, and how important those are, over and above any money we can make or anything else. And I think that this war going on now in Ukraine is another indication of the preciousness of relationships, that we are in a global village. And so our relationships, across borders are critical as well, and how we care for one another and how we treat one another. And, I'm very disturbed by the war in Ukraine, but I've been so disturbed by the war in Afghanistan, by the war in Palestine that continues, and we don't even call it that, and so many others. So, that's what this group is about, right? Speaking truth to power, trying to keep the global relationships that we treasure and care about alive. So thank you for reminding us, Vida, of this. I sure appreciate that myself. So I appreciate that you all allow me to share with you my recent trip. I'm gonna share my screen and hopefully it works, because you know how it goes. Wait, let me see. It's not showing up.
Do you need permission from the host, or do you already have that?
No, I have that permission, but Rick, let's see if this is it.
In the meantime, if I could just ask Vida put the name of that book in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know why it's not letting me share. Oh my God.
Take your time, Grace. I know it'll add to your talk to screen share.
Well, yes, because it's all the pictures. And I think that the pictures speak more than what I could say.
Just look at your settings. I'm sure others can.
I've shared so often, but let's see. Only hosts can share. Is that the problem?
Yeah.
Well, let's make double sure. Who's our Zoom host today?
It's Dave Clennon, and he did make me co-host.
All right, let's see if I can, I'm going to look at my own settings. I don't see an option there to, I don't see anything saying that I am the only one who is allowed to share screen. I wouldn't know how to do it anyway. But I don't think it's restricted to the host.
I don't see, this is a problem, and I should have tried it out. I don't know why it's not. Anyway.
Michael Novak, any suggestions? Dave, can you reverse what you did and then do it again?
Okay, let me try to do that. But
you could make you could transfer the hosting itself to Grace to let her screen share, and then she can make you the host when she's done.
Okay, I'll do that right now. I made her co-host, but now I will make her a full host and see if that helps. Wait a minute, it's not. Now it's not letting me. Oh, wait a minute, make host. Okay. All right. Wait a minute. All right. So now you, Grace, you're becoming the head host. I don't know if I'll even. Is that any help?
Let's see. Okay. It just the strange thing is just not showing up my slideshow, which is weird. It's not showing up.
Are you seeing it on your own screen?
On my screen is my slideshow, but when I do share, it doesn't show.
Okay.
So I'm not sure why. If I do advanced, it doesn't show either.
Sometimes you have to select what part of your screen. Do you have like little boxes within the screen that and you can click on the one that?
Yeah, but I do have little boxes that show up, but it doesn't have that. It has my computer audio, slides as virtual background, video, content, and then none of when I share that, it doesn't work. Okay, hold on. I'm trying something else here. Oh. See, it just doesn't want to show it. It's kind of leaves it in the background.
Can you email your slides to Michael and he can share them?
I can try. Let me see whether it'll go in the email or if it's too big. I'll try.
Okay.
Let me see. I'm sorry about this, guys. Are there any announcements?
We did the major one. Fernando, you want to talk about the green bucket?
Oh, yes. I forgot to say that as far as I know that this is a very important work. So we're asking people to donate to pay for our expenses like what we're doing now to Zoom. So when we meet in person, we have a bucket that goes around. But at this point, we have it on the green. How do you say this? The green part of your email. And so please donate so we can continue this very important work. Like Steve has really a good, many issues that we can learn. And so we need this donation to hopefully continue our work. And so please, okay. Is there anything else that we could do? Is there any announcement as
I did
Grace,
send this to Michael. Did you get it, Michael? Oh, maybe he's not there.
Well, Grace, I'll introduce myself. I think I got on too early.
I'm checking my email.
Okay, it's through mail drop.
I couldn't get back on, so I just got on my computer and came back on. It's me, Dr. V. And then everybody love and knowing that whatever it is with Grace, I know it's coming up. Well, with Michael,
but anyhow, maybe those persons that haven't introduced themselves, like Ruby, maybe this is the time to introduce yourself.
All right, she's doing that.
Dave, how do I make Michael co-host or get out of being hosting?
I think, do you want me to take you out of the hosting?
Yes, because I apparently can't share for some reason.
Okay. Let me.
I think, Grace, at this point, you have to change the hosting because if he made you host, he doesn't have the ability to do that.
I don't see how to do that.
Go to participants panel.
Yeah.
And if you scroll over his name and it says more.
I see. Okay.
You should say make host, or I guess you want to make me host at this point.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll make you as a host. Oops, I can't. I just sent it to Dave. He's got to do it for you.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Well, let me just give you a little introduction anyway, as they try to get this going. And I apologize that the pictures are not there, but I've been working.
Hey.
Oh, hey, yay. Oh, miracle. Okay, let's get going then. Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you all for your patience. I'll have to figure out what's going on with my computer that it didn't let me do that. In the meantime, let me just give you a little background. For some time, I've been working with a group at the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles that has been concerned about issues at the border. Quite a bit of our action in LA on immigrant issues have been with the immigrants already here. And so we were concerned about the buildup at the border, particularly the southern border. So in 2017, we had gone down to Tapachula, which is the city on the Mexican-Guatemalan border, and had attended a human rights conference there. And so at the time, we were submitting a letter, probably a legal brief to the Organization of American States to demand that the US would quit supplying money to Mexico for the kind of brutality that was going on at the southern border. And then right at the time that we submitted that, the presidential, hello? Is somebody calling me to stop? No?
Can everybody else go on
just
mute, please?
it's to mute.
Okay, everybody please mute if you don't mind. And so we found out that the new president, Donald Trump, was not very open to any kind of changes. And so that paper kind of just sat there. And then we decided in 2019 that it was time to go back again 2 years later to see how things had changed and to begin to connect in a better way. But then COVID came and we kept postponing the trip and postponing it. And the main purpose was because we are concerned as a diocese and as a group of people working in Los Angeles, what ways could we be more effective in our advocacy? What do we need to learn in order to be more effective? And how could we build relationships with partners? Because it's clear that this is a regional issue and not just one country's issue. So we then decided finally in January that we could go. Do you want to do the next slide, please, Michael? So what we did was we followed, if you look in the middle of this map of Guatemala, I would point it with my cursor, but you won't see it. You'll see the Ciudad de Guatemala, that's the city. We came down along that red line. So we started there for 3 days and then came down along that red line and kept going over to up north, the other wrong way, Michael, going on up, not there, the lower red line. That one, exactly. And ended up there at the Rio Sukiati and Tapachula, which is right at that point of the border. And that was kind of our trajectory. Next slide. We were a group, very small group. This is our group. An immigration lawyer, 3 priests, a bishop, a layperson like myself, and then on the far right, Alan Yarborough, who is the special envoy for Latin America for the National Church of the Episcopal Diocese. So next slide. Our small group, we arrived, our red eye landed in Guatemala City early in the morning, and we were met by the Reverend, the Bishop, Silvestre Romero, who gave us breakfast and then brought us to the old city of Antigua. This was our first day in Guatemala. Look at this beautiful city. It's a colonial city. The volcanoes are at the background. That volcano on the very first picture to the left is live, and it was active while we were there. We often could see smoke coming out of it. It's called Volcano Fuego. And I'm sitting up on our rooftop deck. The bishop had chosen this city for our first meeting because we were going to meet with clergy from the Guatemalan diocese who were spread all over the country. And these were actually, Antigua is more centrally located. So next slide, please. So the next day we met with the Anglican clergy. Next slide. And here you see the group that got together in a very beautiful convent. Antigua is just such a beautiful city. And it was kind of like, wow, we're really freed from all the angst of migration when we're in this setting. But it turned out to be a very important time of meeing with them. We learned a lot. Some of them, for example, one of the priests himself had been an undocumented migrant and had shown how he, 30 years ago, put his 2 little kids on the bridge and sent them across the bridge by themselves. So this is an ongoing issue. It's not a recent issue. You know, and he talked and shared about the tragedy of having to separate yourself from your children because you know that that's the best for them, and the sorrow that he felt. But then he recounted to us the opportunities that his 2 children have had because of that experience that they wouldn't have had they remained in the setting where they were. So we heard stories like this. Another priest, if you might recall, there was a truck that had an accident with migrants in Mexico, just across the border from Guatemala. And many of these people died. They were all packed into the back of the truck. I think 44 people died, if you might remember that, just a year ago. And one of the priests was called upon by his compassion to just go there and minister to people as a chaplain. And so we heard these kind of stories. And I think what was important for us was to start our time with this meeting because we realized that there's a whole flock of people who are our partners, and that our trip was right on. They were waiting for us not to just do things as a diocese, but rather to recognize the regional partnerships that we had. And I think one of the things that was key is that we learned that, you know, migrants never just rush out. We have this idea that everybody's just rushing out and joining caravans and moving up to the US when they feel there's an opportunity. No, actually what we discovered through the stories that all these priests told us was that migrants really deliberate. They talk with each other. They talk with family. They talk with friends. They think. They try to figure out, is there a different way to survive? You know, what's going to happen to me as we go? Is this something I really want to embark on, even if I'm going with my children? And so, you know, the process is a difficult process, let's not think that it's easy for them, that they're just jumping at an opportunity to become wealthy. But rather it's a very, very difficult process, and that they take their time deliberating on it. And that was a very important learning that we took from that very first day. Next slide, please. But we ended that day with a lovely meal, a typical Guatemalan meal. And I think this was the treat that we got as we worked, was the food. We had such excellent food in the country, and we were very grateful for that. Okay, next slide. We started out with going to this place, which is called Casa del Migrante. This is a place that's run by the Californian priests, and it is an international religious order that serves migrants and refugees, and has a network of these ministries in 32 countries, including Tijuana, just a few miles south of our diocese, but also in Tapachula, which we had visited before. We learned when we came there that a caravan of migrants had just left for points north, so we just missed them. Let me just tell you that even as we took the trip, we found that Tapachula at one point had been crowded with refugees and migrants seeking asylum, but that the government of Mexico had dispersed them throughout the country. And so we knew we probably wouldn't encounter as many migrants as we had originally expected. But it turned out to be okay, because it gave us a chance to actually talk to staff at these different organizations who weren't overwhelmed with the group of migrants that came. So the Casa del Migrante is a place where they do, next slide, please, where they do considerable amount of support and help for the people. The two women on the right were the staff that talked to us. One is a social worker and one is a psychologist. And they told us that their place is not a permanent shelter. This is more like people arrive in Guatemala City, they know about the Casa del Migrante, and they stop there on their way up north. They stop to kind of take a shower, to get refreshed, you know, to get some help. And we learned through the process what a pivotal and key role this Casa del Migrante plays. Next slide. These people, as they arrive, they're given rapid COVID tests because we were in the pandemic. And then if they have COVID, they were immediately put into quarantine in one of their rooms. They do not have a lot of rooms. So it's very limited. That's why it isn't a shelter where people can stay for days on end. Basically, it's a 24-hour type thing. They are interviewed to determine their needs. They are given an orientation to let people know what they can expect along the route and help people make a plan for their movement on up. I'm sorry that somehow in the shifting, my slides are all messed up, but you all can figure it out. You're bright enough to see that. These are packets that they put together that they give to each person with just bare essentials for the next stage in their road. You know, they have toilet paper, female sanitary napkins, toothpaste, some toothbrush, you know, just kind of toiletries and personal hygiene items that are not given out with food along the way. And so Casa del Migrante has decided this is the thing they can give them to help them as they move along. Next slide. Here you see the same map that I told you before, but what's significant about this is that all those points on the map are actually different agencies and different nonprofit organizations that work with immigrants and refugees. And the other side of the screen, you see that list there. You may not be able to make it out, but it doesn't matter. What it does is it gives, everybody is handed this map and handed this piece of paper on the back, which lists all these places so that they can know that they can move from one place to a next and find safety and be more secured from the poverty, violence, and other things that they are going to be encountering along the road. Next slide. Our next visit was in the afternoon. We were invited by Ambassador Pope, P-O-P-P. He is the US ambassador to Guatemala, and he welcomed us into his residence. And as we talked with him, we wanted to find out what US policies were and how were they being interpreted by the staff in Guatemala. Next slide. He told us, and Ambassador Pope told us, that 60% of the economy is informal. And that means, by informality, means that they're just, you know, trying to exist, basically. They're outside of the formal economy. And rural sectors are in deep, deep poverty that are impacted by climate change, as well as that gives lower agricultural production, as well as all the other issues that are involved in deep poverty. So he said that 80% of Guatemalans leave because of poverty, and thus their office is focusing on economic development, trying to find ways in which they can assist people to gain a level of sustainability that will not push them up north. But he also realized that in doing that, you can't just focus on economic development unless you have a comprehensive approach, because climate is a huge problem. We have this dry corridor all going all the way up in the Northern Triangle that has decimated agriculture. And it's caused by logging, it's caused by hurricanes, it's caused by mineral extraction that has devastated the mountainsides. And therefore, people are absolutely unable to even grow things for their own consumption, let alone to make some money. So he said, thrown into that is the whole corruption issue and the lack of education. And so you really need a comprehensive approach. You cannot just focus on economic development, but to do that, they need partners. The USAID cannot do it all by themselves. They need the local NGO partners, they need the business community, etc. And then he said, but they themselves are focusing on the populations that have been sidelined: women, children, youth, and the indigenous population. And I was reminded of this just a couple of days ago when Guatemala passed a law that is now two laws, one against LGBTQ or same-sex marriages, which is another form of discrimination against LGBTQ people. And the other is that now women who have an abortion will have long jail sentences. Before that law, it was only 3 years, which is bad enough. But now it's, I think, 11 years, but don't quote me on that. I have not read the law. Then we asked the ambassador, well, what can the faith-based community do? And he said, well, we need to be we need to be involved with the Central American miners. That's for sure. This is a very high priority. And to do that, and that's a high priority for the US government, but the faith community can be a bridge of trust for reunification. He says that, this is weird, Michael, why it's doing this on the slide, but the USCIS office is focusing on the Central American Miners Program. And then the other recommendation for the faith-based community, which doesn't show up here on the slide, is that we can be advocates. We can be a special kind of advocates. He told us that there's 140,000 work visas offered every year to people in to enter the United States. Of those 140,000, only 6,000 were given to the what do you call it? The Northern Triangle, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. So he said, you can advocate for a legal work pathway and try to get our Congress to allow more people from that region to get work visas. So those were kind of two major things that he recommended. Focus on the children and being a bridge of trust for reunification. And the other thing is to advocate for a legal work pathway. And by the way, this reunification thing was very important because one of the things that we discovered was that the US is just sending them back, and they arrive in the airport and there's nobody to meet them. But worse than that, even if somebody were aware that a plane is landing with returnees, they land in a different part of the airport. They don't land where normal people come out. So they don't even know that it's way on the other side, which is more the armed forces side of the airport. And so people are just left there stranded when they come off the plane and out of the airport. So there's ways in which the faith community there in Guatemala can work also to make sure that people at least are met in a way that helps them find a bearing once they get back. Next slide, please. Now we are back to we're day 4, I think that says. Yes, and we're still in Guatemala City. Next slide. We went to visit an organization called Cristosal, which is there's all kinds of vulnerabilities in amongst the people, and these surfaced in our route. They're people who are not just children, but Black people are really discriminated against. LGBTQ migrants, women, we began to see people with all kinds of vulnerabilities. And Cristosal is a leading human rights organization that has deep Episcopal roots working in that area. It started out in El Salvador. It is now in all the Northern Triangle. And we met with the people in Guatemala that promote justice, human rights, and democratic societies. They work a lot through litigation, just a lot of their work is legal. When they do research in order to be able to support that legal work. And they do a lot of human rights monitoring and training of people to know what their human rights are and how they can advocate for themselves. And in Guatemala in particular, it has been focused really on LGBTQ individuals. There's been a lot of slayings, a lot of killings. So one of the things that they have done is organize strategic teams of interdisciplinary researchers, lawyers, psychologists, and these teams go out together. so that when they are doing outreach with vulnerable individuals, there is a comprehensive approach where you can work with one another. And then they also especially work with people who have been violently dislocated because of mineral extraction. Like I told you earlier, that's a big contributor to the dry corridor. So they monitor needs, they set up systems of alerts through social media, multiple ways they're using technology. It's a brilliant staff. Next photo. Here's a picture of the staff that are incredible, capable people. And because there were no migrants there right at that point, we were able to really learn a lot from them. Next slide. And then we went in the afternoon to the cathedral, had another wonderful meal, and learned more about our own diocese, which I won't bore you with all those kind of denominational issues. Next slide. We begin now our trek through the Continental Divide. Take a look at that picture of the volcano there in the background. This was the landscape that we encountered. Look how dry it is. These are the tropics, folks, but look at what has happened. And no wonder people are struggling. But this is also the trek. It took us 6 hours to go from Guatemala City up to the Mexican border to Tapachula. We went by van. A lot of these people, if they're walking through that bush, this is what they'll go through. But most of them are actually they work a little bit and get money for a bus fare, and then they move to the next stage, work a little bit, sell something, then make money and get a bus for the next stage, etc. So we went through a lot of little towns like this. People are entrepreneurial. This lady behind that screen is making tortillas. You see the little stack of homemade tortillas that she's got there. Delicious, by the way. Selling them and then able to make a little bit more money. Next slide. We encountered this park, which was in the midst of all that dryness. This is a little town that has a very nice park with a lot of trees. So a lot of migrants stop here to kind of refresh themselves, to be able to sleep in the shade of a tree, to get some refreshment along the way. Next slide. Here we see those benches. At night, those benches are full of people sleeping in this park. So it is a place that could be used as a way of outreach. In other words, giving more orientation, more support to migrants. And these are the kind of spots we found along the way, where there's a little Episcopal church not far from this. And we thought, well, this is logical. That church could do outreach and welcoming to migrants who come to this park. Next slide. And then we arrived at the river. We're crossing a bridge in the van and we looked down into the river, and then there we saw 2 migrants getting ready to cross. At this point, it's not very deep, but it is quite strong, the current. So if you slip, it could be dangerous, and particularly if you have children. We had never in the times we had been there before, we had never had such a difficult time with checkpoints. It was unbelievable. It was, first of all, an hour-long wait in a line. We had to wait for immigration control. There were multiple luggage checks all along. And we were legal, right? We had passports from the United States, and yet it was an hours long. We'd get through one checkpoint and go through another. Imagine what people are facing as they come there. And one of the things we encountered, next slide. Oh, I wanted to just, next slide, please. Further down the river is this scenario, which is where we went in 2017. And this is how people cross on makeshift rafts that, but you see the bridge up there, but they were crossing with goods, and it's a very porous border, as you can see, until the Mexican government was armed to the tilt with ways of pushing the people back so that they could not enter the Mexican soil. Next slide. And while we were in line waiting for things, we saw these buses, and we're not allowed to take pictures, so I surreptitiously caught these little shots. But these are buses that are getting filled up with immigrants that are being sent back from Mexico, and they're going to be taken to Guatemala City and dropped there. So we see at every point the way people are just, there's no hospitality on the part of governments. You know, there's no hospitality of welcoming. There's, you know, just get them on the buses, get them out of here so we don't have to deal with them. And that's financed by you and me, because we pay our taxes, and this is where our tax money is going. Fortunately, Mexico has now just issued what they call a QR code, and they are now trying to develop ways in which people will leave Tapachula and go to those other parts of Mexico where they might have a better chance of maybe finding a living, or at best disperse the immigrant crisis across other cities and not have it all condensed in one, in Tapachula. Next slide. So we arrive at Tapachula, which is the open air prison. And the first group we met with was Chirla. All of us here in LA are so familiar with Chirla, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights in Los Angeles. This young man in the middle on the left, who was talking with those two women, he was asked by Chirla to go work with the caravans 2 years ago. And so they sent him down, and a lawyer, the two of them went down to work with the caravans, and then COVID struck. And so it became this more seriously damaging for themselves to be in that vulnerable position with the uncertainties of COVID that Vida just referred to in our talk. And so their boss at Chirla, Angelica Sala, said, go down to Tapachula, you know, just go down there and start working with immigrants there. And they are amazing what they do. So on the left picture, the guy with the mask that you see with a gray t-shirt, he's talking to a group of Haitians. What we discovered is there's mostly Haitians there, trapped there because they're the most discriminated against because of their color. And they have come the longest. They have come all the way from Chile and from Brazil and worked their way through Latin America, through jungles, through all kinds of things, looking for getting to the US, where Haitians, until very recently, had temporary protective status. And now the US government has turned against them. And so they're kind of trapped. Mexico doesn't know what to do with them. They feel but anyway, so the Chirla, the guy who's in the gray t-shirt, he was in a caravan and he met these other workers from Chirla and has joined the staff now to kind of help inform these people what their rights are and what they can do. And then this woman that is being talked to, she is Cuban refugee, and her husband was detained the day before, and she was deathly afraid of going to visit him at the detention center because she thought she would be arrested. And the Chirla staff informed them of what their rights are, what they can do, how they can appeal, because as a Cuban, they have the right to stay in Mexico. And he should never have been arrested. And Chirla then helps them understand that. We found out later by working with the Chirla people all day long that in the evening, he was talking to this woman again for a couple of hours, trying to help her figure out. And then on the very right is a young Haitian man, super bright, beautiful guy, who had gotten a degree in hospitality services in Chile. He had been living in Brazil with his parents, who had come over to build the stadiums and other facilities for the Olympics that were held there in Brazil several years back. And he didn't see any future for himself. So he went to Chile and he got a degree, but he found them very much anti-Black. For example, he said, I asked him specifically, can you just give me an example? And he said, yeah, I was in my class and the professor asked a question and nobody raised their hands because they didn't know the answer for whatever reason, but I knew the answer. I raised my hand and he turned to me and he said, what are you, a Black person, know anything about this? And that was kind of the blatant kind of racism that he felt, and it finally got unbearable and he said, I've got to leave. And of course, hospitality industry right at COVID time is not the best to be in. So he is now trapped there in Tapachula, but is working as a volunteer with Chirla. We loved that guy and we said, why is the US turning people like this away when they could be such assets to our country? And we found this over and over and over and over again. Next slide, please. We then went, you see that boxcar there, that's one of the train cars from the notorious La Bestia, the train where people jump on to go through Mexico and get to the top of the Rio Grande where they can cross into the United States. This is the old train station that has been modernized. That boxcar is left there as a historical memorial. And in these little cubicles that you see, which are under that roof, so I've taken the picture from quite a distance, there are all kinds of services for migrants that they can come to. So there's a free clinic and there's other kinds of services. So they've repurposed this old train station to better serve immigrants. The problem that we found is that the damn place is hard to get into. We had to go all the way around Robin Hood's barn, around fences and through the market before we finally found a way to get in. So it's not very welcoming to the very people they intend to help. I hope they change that. But at that time, we saw very few migrants taking advantage of those services. Next slide. The UNHCR and a couple of other UNHCR is the United Nations Human, United Nations Refugee, and I forget what the initials stand for, but it's the national
High Commissioner.
High Commissioner. Thank you, Michael. This is, I'll say it's my COVID brain. It's the High Commission for Refugees. They have supported this hospitality and solidarity shelter for immigrants there in Tapachula. It's a beautiful place. It has capacity for 300. This is a long-term shelter. This is a place where people are waiting for permanent for their permanent visa to stay in Mexico and work. It is because a lot of people are being given those visas, but it takes a long time. It takes sometimes a year or a year and a half. So this shelter is set up to accommodate 300 people, giving them legal assessment and help. They give them psychological and medical support, and of course, recreation with movies, workshops, etc., and even a little school. Next slide. Here are some little banners or posters that the kids had made. This is a school without borders, and there's all the different flags of different countries. This is a school for all. This pink sign says, "We have a right to be heard as migrants." And then the little one up there drawn by another child is, "We have a right to be refugees." Really sweet signs of expression. And this shelter is fantastic for that reason, in that it allows the people through art and through different ways to gain some acceptance of who they are and be proud in who they are. It was really very wonderful. The problem is, it only serves 300 people. And at times Tapachula has 5,000 people with need in there. So it feels like a drop in the bucket, but yet it's an important drop in the bucket. And I guess we all can do different drops in the different buckets, right? to make sure we fill the bucket itself. Next slide. Oh, something didn't count. Oh, I know what didn't go over. It was a little video I was going to play, but we then had, at the end of the night, we had a mass in the park since we had 2 bishops and all these priests. And this is a park in Tapachula that is crowded with immigrants and refugees. And then they just spontaneously came up to be blessed by one of the bishops. So this is what he's doing. Next slide. Our group then had expanded. On the left, we were our little group of 8 people, and then all the Chirla staff, who just kind of became appendages to us as we went through our week. And that night we ended with a dinner together, sharing around the table our stories and being able to learn more about each other. Next slide. This is now our last day. We went to 2 more grassroots, I would say, grassroots organization. This one is called El Buen Pastor. This lady with the white dress is Doña Olga. So Doña Olga, in the 1990s, she went to the hospital and saw people with their limbs cut off and amputees and so on. And she said, "Well, where did this happen?" And they had fallen off the train, La Bestia, and the train had run over their legs and had amputated them. And so when the people are released from the hospital, they have nowhere to go. And Doña Olga said, "This can't be." And she brought a couple to her home to take care of them. In these pictures, she then started going to the tracks themselves and started getting people who had been injured from the train and taking them to the hospital. And then when they were released, taking them home. So these are pictures of some of those people. And she said, I can't just let them out. And her shelter has grown. She has now, can you do the next slide, please? She now has 1,200 people in a very large building and that keeps adding to. Here we see, 400 to 500 of those people are women and children. Imagine cooking for 1,200 people 3 meals a day. I mean, that is a lot of work. And she's just a small nonprofit. She gets donations. People come and bring a sack of rice, or people bring a sack of beans, or some people bring money. We fished in our pockets to get every bit of red cent that we had to leave with them. And they do all their cooking there. There's a big, huge bunch of black beans that are getting ready to be cooked. And then in the picture down below on the right, you see they bake bread for them. So it's a huge outfit, and yet just very small and grassroots. And this woman is amazing, and you wonder, the world is made up of so many women like that. International Women's Day. Thank you, Fernando, for reminding us. She's one that we need to honor for International Women's Day. Next slide. Here you see a new wing that's been built, and you have about 300, I think they said, men that are sleeping in that wing. And people all over in the corridors, everywhere you turned, people are sleeping because that's what they have. They have nothing else. And that, that basically was a sense in which, go back to the old slide, please. There was a sense in which we really felt like, there is a stark contrast between the official kind of UN sponsored or funded shelters and these others that are run by people, activists really, who have just taken migrants in transit into their places, into their homes, and then built something around that. And when you think of that, you see really the pull. I mean, people are waiting. We met people at this shelter from Nicaragua, from name it, every country in the Central America, except for Costa Rica, and all of them just really in the plight of poverty and just wanting a better future for themselves and mostly for their children. What do we do about that? The last slide then is really, okay, now we are back in the gateway city of Los Angeles, where migrants end up. And now we are in the big task of working together as a group of all the partners we met along our route. We've been having Zoom calls to debrief and to figure out what our strategy will be as a region for that, and to embark on a different way of looking at it, rather than staying in our own silos, working across the region to support each other as we go along. So I can't tell you what we're coming up with, but I will pass it on once we make some decisions. So thank you. I will now open it up for any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you, Grace. This is a very good and very important, presentation that you have, because really, this is one of difficult issues in terms of dealing with immigrants and so forth. So we will open it for question. If anyone has a question, please raise
Question
your
or
hand.
comment, maybe comment even,
Comment.
right? From your own experience.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, Grace, you've spoken about the various factors that cause these problems: the climate, the corruption, whether it's because of your inherent diplomatic nature or not, you haven't said anything about US foreign policy towards Central American countries. And I'm curious what you think about the extent to which those policies, say, for example, the Hillary Clinton quarterbacked coup against the president of Honduras, have played a role in creating all this human misery.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the background, right? Those are the deeper roots. And our trip, I focused on our trip because we were trying to see what's going on right now. But yes, those roots of US policy are what is in our original statement to the OAS, and which will be part of any other advocacy that we do, because we have allowed our corporations to just kind of run rampant in Central America and make money off of people, all of that. So yes, it's a much deeper topic, but we are responsible ultimately for a lot of this. And when you look at the way we do this around the world, it's just another kind of war. It's another kind of war. It is not with military, although it is with military. What am I talking about? We're the ones who arm all of Central America, right? So it is a war. And what the flicker of hope is that there is money being diverted to development rather than arms and rather than sending it to the government. But I'm very skeptical, frankly, myself, given the nature of our history, and given the nature that governments change, and given the nature that corruption is everywhere, especially in the United States. So I don't hold out a lot of hope. What we did see was that a shift in policy of setting up these refugee centers within Guatemala. Kamala Harris had said there would be 12 of them. We found that according to the ambassador, only 2 have been established, in which people can come there and find out what possibilities of asylum or refuge they might have, rather than waiting until they get to the border. That's a step in the right direction, but it's a small step.
Grace, this was a phenomenal presentation. Thank you so much.
I saw that you asked what USCIS was. It's United States Citizenship and Immigration Services.
Great, thank you.
Is there anyone else? Maybe you can raise your hand.
There's 3 people who've raised their hand, Fernando.
Where do I see it?
Should I call on them?
Yeah, call them, because
Okay.
I could not.
Okay, I saw Carol Francis, Anthony, and Stephen Fisk. Carol Francis?
Yeah, thank you for this. It just brings back our work in the 80s around Central America. And the movie El Norte, which we should all see again.
Yeah, yeah.
When you talk, I'd never heard of the Northern Triangle. I just looked it up while you were talking. What's significant about Honduras, El Salvador,
and
that they're
Guatemala.
called the Northern Triangle? And also, I really appreciate, and I was blown away by what you said about this immigrant from Cuba getting special treatment in Mexico. And the Haitians are just not. I remember that's always been US policy. That I remember in the 90s when there was one of the migrants rushing out of Cuba. And it was a little economic thing that had blown up. And it happened at the same time that there was this huge violence in Haiti, that with the coup, and people fleeing for their lives. And there's a story of a raft or a boat arriving in the United States, and the US Coast Guard seeing two black faces among these brown faces and said, "You're from Haiti, we are getting sent back. You're from Cuba, welcome." Is that a policy that the Mexican government also follows? Or is that they're just saying, this is US policy, so?
I couldn't say that that's what they're saying, Carol Francis, because I would need to look into the laws more, and it would have been a good question. We could have asked the Chirla folks. They probably would know that answer. But I would say that there's a lot of racism in Central America, even in Latin America. There's been a historical colonial oppression of people of color, and indigenous people are lumped into that. So the people who are from the colonists, which is mainly Spain and Portugal, right? Those, and then in the southern cone, yes, there are some from Germany and so on and so forth, but in the rest, it's mostly Spain and Portugal, who were called Ladinos. Those are the good people, the white people, you know, the ones that are lighter skin. Lighter skin is favored or more intelligent for some reason. And yet more intelligent. Look at what the indigenous populations built in the Mayan and the Inca, you know, and Aztec times. Unbelievable how racist this is, you know. So racism is really, you know, it's funny because on the one hand, the last time we were in Tijuana, which was probably just before COVID, we encountered quite a few Haitians in Tijuana who were waiting to cross the border. At that point, the US government was allowing Haitian women and children to enter, or if you were pregnant, you could enter into the US. Now that's closed, that's not happening. But when we talked to people in Tijuana who were not Haitian about their feelings about all these Haitians there, they were quite positive towards them, even taxi drivers. They said, no, we like these people, they're good people, and they work hard. And, you know, it was interesting to me. And yet, on the other hand, the Haitians that are in Tapachula really feel a discrimination against them right now. So, you know, I think racism is part of the human condition. And I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't be able to say, oh, it's because of US policies. I think it's deeper than that. It's maybe colonial, you know, and the US has been also a victim of colonial racism. So, Anthony.
Wow. Grace, just such an excellent presentation. And so I have a few questions though, about what we can do. I was intrigued that the ambassador seemed to show some interest and compassion for minors and said we should be advocating for them. And also he brought up work permits and how important it is to advocate for that. It's almost as if he's giving us some marching orders as activists. Finally, I also was thinking about the plight of LGBTQ people and how they are being suffering a lot of discrimination and worse. So my question is, number one, did your delegation come up with some concrete ideas for action, what we can do? And could you share those with us? And secondly, I wanted to focus on LGBTQ. Are they be given any consideration for refugee status or status because they're a persecuted minority? And if not, why not?
Deep questions. You know, on the one hand, it's very difficult what Cristosal told us, which is the main group working on the LGBTQ issue. and they have LGBTQ staff who works, but they say it's very difficult to get people to identify what's really happened to them, because it's dangerous. It's dangerous to speak out. And so they have to work hard at getting them to tell them what was going on. Partly also, this has to do also with indigenous populations that have been displaced. The government, Guatemalan government, denies that there's any displacement. So, you know, if you speak out and say, we've been kicked out because of mineral extraction, you know, our lands have been taken over by the mineral companies. The Guatemalan government said that's not true. And that's where they get oppressed, right? And they get silenced in multiple ways. So their option is, let me leave the country. There's this sense of wanting freedom, just a sense of wanting to breathe, you know. And that's been the same with you know, Berta Cáceres in Honduras, when she was speaking out on the environmental degradation. What happens? She gets killed, you know. And they say it's thugs. Yeah, okay, who sponsored those thugs? Anyway, so it's very difficult, and we couldn't really extract information because we're just jumping in and jumping out, right? You need to build a relationship with people in order to really hear their stories. Even the little stories that we heard were because, like this young man from Haiti who had come all the way up from Chile, he told us his story because we were with Chirla, right? And that's who he trusts, you know, that kind of thing. You have to develop that. As for recommendations, that's what we're working on. It's such a complex thing, but we ourselves pushed the button with the ambassador. We said, we feel that the faith community can assist the US government in efforts. How can the faith community, you know, be part of a compassionate, empathetic, just policies with immigrants and refugees in Guatemala, for example, because we had the bishop with us. And that was one thing that was interesting. I had been a bit reluctant to go to begin with, and then our whole team shared that same reluctance because we thought, you know, here's these Americans coming down and they have the money to travel and they can go down, and, you know, what's the value added? So we deliberately asked questions about this before we planned the trip and began to investigate with the Guatemalan priests and bishops. And we found out that actually the bishop told us, no, on the contrary, you can go into doors that are closed to us. But when we come with you, we can go into those doors. For example, you wouldn't believe, but the residence of the US ambassador that we went to is around the corner from the residence of the bishop. And yet they had never met because those doors are not open. But because he came with us, now they're having meetings, and he's trying to be a conduit for getting the ambassador to realize how policies impact people at the grassroots. I have to say, we were impressed with this ambassador in spite of the fact that he was appointed by Trump. When we heard he was a Trump appointee, we had really bad expectations. And there's our own prejudices coming out, right? That, but to tell you the honest truth, when we said to him, well, what can the faith community do? And he gives us those 2 points, you know, we're like, okay, maybe there is some hope. And so, Anthony, we will work on those 2 things. We already have been working on the Central American minors issue anyway. So we will continue, and we will work on the visas. But we'll have to figure out the way to do it. And make sure that it's a regional, that we're all pushing for this along that route of the Northern Triangle, Mexico, and the US, at least LA diocese. LA and San Diego diocese, we were in this together. The immigration lawyers with the San Diego diocese who was on our delegation. But to come back to Carol Francis, I never answered your question about what's the Northern Triangle. The Northern Triangle is stated as such because those are the three most corrupt, most difficult, and the ones that are sending the most number of immigrants up the path. And so that's a focus on this Northern Triangle. Nicaragua is not a part of that, although we saw many more refugees from Nicaragua than we ever thought we would see, and talk to people in that shelter for 1,200. There's quite a few Nicaraguans. Situation is dire in Nicaragua right now for people. So we have seen those refugees, but it's a different ball game from Honduras on up. So that's why it's called the Northern Triangle. It's those three countries. Okay, Stephen. Yes.
Hi, Grace. Thank you so much for your journey, for your inquiry, for your education, for your educating us, and but most of all for your heart, your compassion, and your deep love.
Thank you.
So appreciative.
Thank you,
of all of
Stephen.
this. But one thing that you didn't really mention much, and I'm curious about, is the role playing with the drug cartels and the whole drug issues. How does that fit into this whole picture?
Those are very major players. The human trafficking, and we might as well call it what it is, the human trafficking that is taking place is sponsored by the drug cartels. They extort tons of money from these people. I mean, the people will sell all their property, the land that they have, everything, just to pay to go on, and they're extortionists. So you can't continue on this trip unless you pay X amount. And so sometimes, people are threatened with kidnappings and so on. The drug cartels are a huge problem, and the war on drugs is not working. It's never been a war on drugs. So that is a multiple aspect, and which is one reason why the ambassador said, we can't focus just on economic development. We have to focus on all these issues because it's impossible without a comprehensive approach. Now, the fact that, Honduras has changed presidencies, we're hoping for something to come out of that. But Nyambingi says, the war on drugs is over and the drugs won. Yep, absolutely. So far, the drugs have won. That is a continuous problem, Stephen, and the solution to that is complex. I certainly wouldn't want to be the one to give an answer that's so quick. But everybody's aware and there's certain grassroots efforts in El Salvador that I know of working with the drug cartels from a faith-based community, which is very interesting. So we'll have to see, what happens. But and Bukele, from what I understand, the president of El Salvador, has made a bargain with the drug cartels. We won't mess with you, but then you support us. It's not good. So whether that's confirmed or not, I couldn't say. Okay, let's see. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Next, I see Michael Novick and then Steve Rohde. Somebody's phone.
7229.
Sorry, me, Ruby. I was trying to get back on again, but I was blocked by the host, and I'm trying to mute myself, okay?
Thank you.
So I was trying to get, let me just figure out how to.
Yes.
Michael?
Okay, and my hand is raised also.
Okay, Michael?
Yes, sir. I guess I really appreciate the presentation. It's amazing, particularly the woman who went from hosting people in her own home to building a 1,200 person institution. It just puts us to shame, I think. I had a couple of comments and I'm reminded after you brought up the drug thing. I just think that the question of the policy is so important because on a dime, the United States suddenly admitted tens of thousands of Afghan refugees. The Europeans have admitted 1 million or 1.5 million people from Ukraine. After their borders were sealed and in both those situations, again, particularly Ukraine, the same thing happened in terms of African people in the Ukraine, Yemeni, Syrian, Afghan refugees in the Ukraine had more trouble getting out, and the question of racism. So I think that's really vital. The U.S. could, on a dime, say no, we're decriminalizing migration. We're welcoming these people. We'll give them protected status, as you said. They take it away, they give it, and I think it's related to the thing about drugs and the drug. The criminalization of drugs and the criminalization of migration is to make it more profitable, because the black market always is more profitable than just legalizing it. So I just want to emphasize that. I mean, I appreciate what you're doing and the need to meet those human needs, but at the same time, it's like waking people up to the fact that this is just a problem created by the policies that are in place and the criminalization that goes on.
Absolutely. And I think, this is where we have to find out, which Congress people are the biggest barriers in our place and begin working, to push those. But it's complex. But yeah, you're right, Michael. It's the policies ultimately that are leading to the problem we have. And that's what we have to work on changing. But that is complicated, and it can only happen, I think, with voices from the grassroots. So anyway, Steve Rohde, and then Fernando. Fernando, you have your hand up? Yeah.
Thank you, Grace.
Okay.
We're so grateful. You are such an ambassador of ICUJP and a liaison for us. 2 parts. One, based on all of this recent information, can you get meetings with Senator Padilla, Feinstein, other congresspersons in Southern California, and take members of your religious delegations directly to them? And then I have a question.
Yeah, we're going to work on that for sure. That's uppermost. I mean, you can't do any policy until you've got your own people supporting the policies you're pushing. So absolutely, that is on the top. And our immigration lawyer is a tremendous asset because he understands all the laws and is helping formulate a response. But we want to make sure, this is where it's not just us, why we need it to be regional, because we could push something and not realize the impacts regionally. And so it's kind of a dance a little bit with the other bishops and priests, but yeah.
Right,
definitely.
and you could expand the delegation beyond the Episcopal
Oh, yeah. And our
True.
partners are critical. Chirla is a critical partner now that they have work in Tapachula, you know, and different partners even up here that are
Good.
part of the ecumenical and broader interfaith group. Yeah.
So my quick question is, I gather we need to distinguish asylum seekers from immigration. You said 80% leave because of poverty. I gather poverty is not an asylum, is not a basis for asylum, only immigration. So what are the current Biden policies on immigration separate from asylum?
Well, that's the crux of the matter. Most of the people coming up from the Northern Triangle are coming up for, I mean, there's Al Otro Lado itself, which is a small little legal nonprofit in Tijuana, has 40,000 people on its rosters waiting. You know, they're never going to get it. There's no way that these people are not going to get it. Our policies in this, whether it's for asylum seekers, immigrants, forget it. Immigrants, you should be applying from your own country. That's the only way you're going to get into the US. But people don't realize that. That's the lack of information. And that's one reason why they want to set up these centers. The US wants to set up these centers so that people get this information from the get-go. The asylum seekers, on top of that, you have to have so much proof. You know, you have to have so much evidence. And even when you do, it can be knocked out because a judge doesn't like you, or a Border Patrol agent doesn't like you. No, the government at this point, it's almost impossible for anybody to enter, frankly. It used to be, at least if you had TPS status, you had a chance to stay for a while. That's slowly being, you know, now Haiti doesn't have it anymore, and, you know, et cetera. So yeah, that's the real crux of the problem, and is lack of information, lack of understanding, and misinformation. Misinformation, because of course the coyotes and the drug dealers and all of them are all anxious for this to continue, because they are making money off of the migrants in all kinds of ways. And so there's a lot of misinformation. They'll say, no, because, you know, so-and-so, my sister, crossed the bridge and she was let in. That gives hundreds of people hope. They say, oh, if that sister crossed, then, you know, maybe I'll be one of those lucky ones, you know. Complete misinformation. Yes, Fernando. And then I see Lucy's hand, yeah. And Ruby.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Grace, because like before, I used to work on many of these immigration issues, maybe on the mid 80s to maybe 2010, you know, and we created this March, what's it called, May Day event every year. And so, you know, I was a spokesperson of this four major organization like CHIRLA, Kiwa, Filipino Worker Center, and I forgot the other one. You know, this is really not an easy, not a Karesan, yeah. This is not an easy issues, because there's so many twists and turns on many of these issues. Then we created also the March 25th Coalition, which is I was part of steering committee on that, and you know, developing many of these protests and so forth, what to demand and so forth, and I agree, and also coming up to conclusion that you are right, because this policy of the United States is, you know, it's like what Carol Francis said. There's always two side of the coin, because though it's complicated, but it's also comprehensive to development of this policy or approach. May 1st is coming, and we must get ready to tackle some of this problem. In my own conclusion, the neoliberalization, if you watch the world, like Nigeria, many of these, has a lot of natural resources, including the Philippines itself, that we have gold and so forth. And you notice, like Nicaragua, this Guatemala, El Salvador, and so forth, is really designed to make many of this country to be poor and to really enslave us in the long run. This is the neoliberalization policies that really impacting many of this country, including here. So we really have to come to terms in really looking at this these policies, because it's designed to to make everybody's poor. Look at the middle class now in the U.S. And
Fernando?
look at people.
Would you call on Lucy and we will wrap up soon?
Ruby
was
also.
in front of me.
And Ruby.
Ruby first.
Yeah.
But you're
Well,
right
first,
about
Ruby, you were ahead of me.
neoliberalism, yes.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay. Anyhow, you mentioned the comprehensive, maybe solution on this. Could you elaborate a little bit? You mentioned a little bit on this comprehensive solution. Could you expound on that?
No, that's what has to happen, but we got to develop it. So that's in process.
Yeah, you can
It's
also
in
count on me.
process. So
Okay.
we'll keep you posted. What we decide as a region, and then with our partners, it's got to be something that we will work on, and I'll report back. So Ruby and Lucy, maybe both of you could mention your questions, and then I will answer both of them at the same time.
I
We're running out of time.
And what happened was the host had blocked me, and so I couldn't get back on. I got on earlier than the host at 7:15. But I'm grateful for what you're speaking about. But what my concern is really the children, because I'm finding and working with children and with young people, they're interested. They're interested in what's happening and coming together. And I've been called on by 2 different organizations. Steve, one was what you were talking about regarding the religious people and the communities and so you kind of answered that question. So my concern right now is like the young people in Los Angeles and getting it together here first.
Good.
So branch out and bring other, communities in the United States.
Should I go ahead, Grace?
Yes, go ahead, Lucy.
So thank you for saying that about the drug cartels, because that's what occurred to me, is that they're making money, so they promote this. I used to hear about USIA, United States Information Agency, and I haven't heard about them in a long time. But since the problem is information and it's the funding of Uncle Sam, surely we ought to be able to get the word out on what the proper immigration procedures are and encourage people to come up legally, perhaps. That's my question. Are they still alive, or did they go the way of all flesh?
I think they must still be alive somewhere, but I don't know where. But I do know that, it is a question of the immigration law. I can't keep track. And that's why we are grateful to have an immigration lawyer working with the delegation, because he helped us see things. It changes so quickly, like Title 42. Do we know what Title 42 is? That's what Trump put into place. And Biden has continued it. It means that you cannot basically stay in the country while you're seeking asylum. And that's against law, against international human rights law. If you're seeking asylum in a country, you're supposed to be able to stay there until you're granted a hearing. And So, and then they'll change something like, okay, they have TPS for Haitians, and then suddenly Haitians are being deported back. They no longer have TPS. It changes too much. And that's a problem. Why these kind of efforts have got to be nimble and flexible and very, very
Comprehensive.
knowledgeable. Very knowledgeable. And so we need all our brains working together, and we could use all our brains on these issues. I think that probably does it, Fernando, for today. Thank you all very much. I'll let you take over now.